Thanks, Gabby. Thanks for all your help. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Janet Domenitz. I am the director of MASSPIRG, and I want to welcome you all to Trash Talk, Two Truths and a Lie About Plastics. This webinar is part of the Solutions to Plastic Pollution webinar series, which is a series of webinars being put on by a national coalition of organizations concerned about plastic pollution. So we are so glad that you could join us this afternoon. I'm going to briefly run through the agenda, and then I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then we're going to dive in. So for the agenda, we're going to first hear from Judith Enck, and I will introduce her momentarily. We'll do a brief Q&A after Judith is done. Then we're going to hear from a few state leaders, myself, Celeste, and Jeanette, who I'll introduce momentarily. We will have another brief Q&A, and we are going to stick to our 1 hour. So you can rely on us for that. So welcome again. Let me now introduce our panelists. Judith Enck has a long and distinguished career in government and in the nonprofit community on a range of environmental protection issues. She was appointed by President Obama to serve as regional administrator at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and she served as deputy secretary for the environment in the New York governor's office. She is the founder and president of Beyond Plastics, which is a national project with the goal of eliminating plastic pollution everywhere. Judith is a regular panelist on the public affairs show The Roundtable on WAMC, which is a local NPR affiliate, and she is currently serving as president of the Beyond Plastics program. And later on in the hour, we will hear from Celeste Mayfrin-Swango and Jeanette Geyer, and I will introduce them when we get to that portion of the program. So for the first 20 minutes or so, we are lucky enough to hear from Judith. So I am going to go on mute and give her the floor. And thanks again for being here, Judith.
Thanks for having me, Janet. One thing you left out of my long and boring bio is my PIRG history. I was a New York Public Interest Research Group, NYPIRG, student activist in college. And the first issue I ever worked on was passing the first original New York bottle bill back in 1982. I was an infant when I worked on it. And it seems like I've now come full circle back working on waste all the time. And the reason we all work on waste is because it's about sustainability and it's about environmental justice. And that is definitely true on the plastics issue. I dropped in the chat the website of my little nonprofit organization, Beyond Plastics. Sign up to get our emails and our updates. We're really quite serious about ending plastic pollution everywhere. Plastics is an environmental justice issue because plastics are mostly manufactured in low-income communities of color in Louisiana, Texas, now Appalachia. Really damaging health. There's a stretch of the Mississippi River called Cancer Alley because of high cancer rates. Plastics is a climate change issue. My organization, Beyond Plastics, put out a report about 1.5 years ago. Plastics is the new coal. We did the math looking at production, use, and disposal of plastics, and calculated that by 2030, there will be more greenhouse gas emissions from plastics than from coal-fired power plants in the entire country. Because thankfully, coal plants are being shut down, but plastic production is the plan B for the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel companies are losing market share for transportation because we're getting electric vehicles. They're losing market share because of the growth of renewable energy sources. And so they've pivoted to plastic production. Huge climate change implications on plastics. Plastics is an oceans and a water quality issue. Up to 15 million metric tons of plastic enter the ocean every year. That's mostly from street litter, trash. That means we are turning our ocean into a watery landfill. And finally, plastics is a health issue. Plastics are made from mostly ethane, a byproduct of hydrofracking, and about 13,000 different chemicals. We are hearing more and more about scientific papers dealing with microplastics. So that's a little piece of plastic, 5 millimeters or less. Scientists have identified large amounts of microplastics in air. We're breathing it in drinking water, in agricultural soil, in seafood, in honey, in beer, and also in our human body. Scientists have found microplastics in human blood, in our lungs, in breast milk, and also the human placenta on both the fetal side and the maternal side. So our babies are being born pre-polluted with microplastics. This is a little daunting, but the good news is there are alternatives to plastics. We don't need to wait for some space age breakthrough. We have a history of reusable, refillable packaging. We could also just source reduce. All of us have had the experience of ordering something online and it comes in so many different layers of packaging. It's like a little Russian nesting doll. How about just reducing? And if you can't maximize reduction, reuse, refill, then use paper, metal, glass, cardboard made from recycled materials and easily recyclable. So we have the alternatives. What we don't have is the political will to change things. So we at Beyond Plastics are pushing really hard on reduction because plastic recycling has been an abysmal failure. Let me state for the record, I strongly support recycling. I started my own town's recycling program in upstate New York. Keep recycling metal, keep recycling cardboard, paper, glass, compost your yard waste and your food waste. But be really careful with plastic recycling, because in reality, in most communities, there are only markets for #1 plastic and #2 plastic. Anything else is just getting sent to the landfill or the incinerator, or it's a source of litter. And I want to carefully explain why. If you have a New York Times newspaper and you want to recycle it, it gets recycled into new paper or new cardboard. It's different with plastics because there are many different plastic resins. They're all different colors and they all have different toxic chemicals in them. So think of your own apartment or your home. Near your laundry, your smelly, dirty laundry, you probably have a bright orange hard plastic detergent bottle. And then in your refrigerator, you have a clear plastic squeezable ketchup bottle. Those two plastic bottles cannot be recycled together. They're different colors, they're different resins, and they're different chemicals. That is why in the United States, the plastic recycling rate has been an abysmal 5 to 6% in recent years. It's never even gotten to double digits. So we need to be honest about the limitations of recycling. Even the plastics industry is starting to acknowledge that. So their latest marketing tool, and it's really not a solution, it's a marketing technique, they're now pushing something called chemical recycling, or it's advanced recycling. And they change the name almost monthly. That's essentially heating plastic to a very high temperature and attempting to make fuel out of it, or using toxic solvents to try to dissolve the plastics and make other plastics. There's one big problem with this. It doesn't work. They've been trying this since the 80s. And in the few instances where there's a lot of taxpayer subsidy and these facilities do come online, they're very polluted. The Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, did an excellent report also documenting that they're cited primarily in environmental justice communities. But this is the big play by the plastics and chemical industry. They do not want to reduce the generation of plastics. So they're running around the country saying, we've got the solution. Don't pass plastic bag bans. Don't pass strong packaging reduction laws. We can use chemical recycling. It's polluting. It emits greenhouse gases. It's a threat to environmental justice communities. It doesn't get built without big public subsidies. And it is greenwashing or a big fat lie. And I am tired of the plastics industry lying to the public. For decades, they told us we can just recycle all of this stuff. Turns out it's not true. Now they're running around state legislatures, and they've been successful in 22 states, getting new laws passed that either provide giant taxpayer subsidies for these facilities. And thanks to Environment Georgia and grassroots activists, one of these facilities in Macon, Georgia was defeated by Brightmark when the curtain was pulled back on what it was really like. Or the other bill is to deregulate it from some environmental regulations. The other big play that I want to alert you to in your state is lawmakers are finally recognizing the seriousness of the plastic pollution problem, and many of them genuinely want to do something to fix it. So cynically, the plastics industry has shown up in state legislatures around the country with a really weak proposal called Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. It's a terrible name. So we've renamed it Packaging Reduction and Recycling Act. And what Beyond Plastics is doing is recognizing that some version of extended producer responsibility is likely to pass. So let's make it good. We are this close to passing a really strong packaging reduction and recycling law in New York State. If you live in New York, if you know anyone in New York, your high school, your college friends, your cranky uncle, your niece, your nephew, get them to call their state legislators to support Assembly Bill 5322, Senate Bill 4246. I'll put this in the chat. This is the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Act. We have kept chemical recycling out of the bill. Chemical recycling not allowed to count as recycling. The bill requires a 50% reduction in plastic packaging over 12 years. Also, anything that's left has to be recyclable. It covers commercial waste, business waste. 12 toxic chemicals are banned from consumer packaging, including PFAS chemicals, mercury, lead, formaldehyde. And we have, the bill provides an inspector general to make sure that when new fees are assessed on companies, that those fees are used to fund local recycling and waste reduction programs. So companies don't want to have to pay fees to have material recycled or reused or properly disposed of. And I don't understand, I understand why they don't want to pay, but if they don't pay, we pay as taxpayers. So this is shifting the financial burden for the cost of packaging reduction onto the companies that make the packaging. And that makes sense because you and I have no voice when a young packaging engineer shows up at some big company and is told, make really nice packaging so our products are sold. They're thinking color, they're thinking, is it innovative? What are the graphics going to look like? They are not thinking about what happens to it after it's used because they have no skin in the game. If your state passes a strong packaging reduction bill, those bright entrepreneurial young packaging engineers or old packaging engineers who can learn new tricks will be told, oh my goodness, in New York State, we have to reduce, eliminate, or have refillable, reusable packaging within 12 years. Holy, you know what? So let's get going. Let's innovate. Companies are not going to change on their own. We've seen this with the climate crisis. We've seen this on biodiversity issues. We just had a horrible decision out of the Supreme Court on wetlands protection, which the states should fill in now. And so when it comes to reducing plastic packaging, companies say that it's cheap. That's why they use plastics, but it's not cheap. When you factor in the health damage caused by plastic, when you look at our rivers and our oceans being turned into watery landfills, when you look at tremendous risk to wildlife, and now we are understanding the risks to people. I'm particularly concerned about environmental justice communities on the front end of production. And then if you don't get to recycle plastic, it's either littered or it goes to an incinerator or a landfill. You burn plastic in an incinerator, you will get small amounts of dioxin. Even small amounts of dioxin can cause tremendous damage. Or it goes to a landfill where it contaminates groundwater and causes real problems locally. There's lots written on this. It's hard for me to cover this in 20 minutes, but for the record, I'm done on time and I'm happy to take questions, and thank you all for joining today. It's with people power that we are going to turn things around. I just raced home from a day at the New York State Capitol because we know you have to work on the inside and work on the outside, but working on the outside is a whole lot more fun because we meet people like one another who are really dedicated to change. This is going to be a long game. We're not going to fix this in a year, but you all getting informed and active makes all the difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. So great. That's exciting about New York. So what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is if people want to put their questions in the chat, I will narrate for you. In the meantime, I'm going to just launch us with my own question for Judith, but please put whatever you want to ask Judith in the chat. We'll try to get to those questions. And then for those of you who joined a little after 4, we'll do that for a few minutes. And then we're going to hear from a few states around the country as to what's happening there. So that'll come up in a few minutes. But first, Judith, I know you mentioned this, but the question I have, because I have a feeling it's the same in just about every state. What do lawmakers say they're hearing from the opponents? I mean, I say that from it's a crisis. We need to do something. We haven't done enough, blah, blah, blah. So what stops action from happening? What do you hear that the legislators are saying, well, X company told me that we'll all go back to the dark ages or whatever it is?
Yeah. So, when I started, when I established Beyond Plastics, which is a project at Bennington College where I teach, and by the way, I teach a class on plastic pollution on Zoom every semester. Janet took it. She can tell you whether it's worth taking or not.
Oh, it's 100% worth, 110% worth taking.
Shameless self-promotion. It's a great class. It's actually mostly community people and then a handful of college students that take it. And it's offered again starting in September. But when I told my friends in the environmental community that I was going to work full-time on plastics, they kind of said, are you nuts? This is the point. Well, they did say, are you nuts? This is the point of your career where you kind of downshift. I did have a couple interesting offers when I left EPA, not from the fossil fuel industry, but, go site renewable energy projects, have weekends off, double your salary. That's all overrated. So I decided to work on plastics because I felt like there was an unmet need and because the politics are so challenging. We're going up against the plastics industry, the chemical industry, and the fossil fuel industry. One thing that I am hearing is legislators saying, what do you mean chemical recycling is not a good thing? The American Chemistry Council was just in here telling me we don't really have to reduce plastics because we can, quote, advanced recycle or chemically recycle everything. And it's an easy answer, but it takes 5 minutes. And often lawmakers don't have 5 minutes. The chemical industry and the fossil fuel industry has a death grip on government decision-making. at the state and federal level, not as much at the local level unless you are in a big petrochemical state where it's beyond a death grip. The hopeful thing is lawmakers want to do something, not to generalize, but it's usually women lawmakers who are stepping up to, there's a big gender gap on the plastics issue. Women lawmakers want to really get into the details, and they don't want just a press release. They want something effective that's going to work. So we're talking to legislators about plastic bag bans, polystyrene bans, skip the stuff. So when you order stuff for dinner, it doesn't come with a mountain of napkins and straws and utensils. New ideas are popping up every day, but the white whale is packaging reduction, because roughly 40% of plastics are used for single-use packaging. And that's the material that we see littered. You all do litter cleanups, beach cleanups. You're seeing a lot of plastics. So I was not planning on doing a lot of work on packaging reduction, but that's our big priority. We have a model bill, and we're trying to get good campaigns going at the grassroots level in multiple states, along with our partners at Just Zero, and we would love more partners in this work.
Great. Okay, Lee asks, how do we find out where new cracker plants are planned or are being built?
Well, they're in Pennsylvania, they're in Ohio, they're in Louisiana, they're in Texas. Go to oilandgaswatch.org, and there are lists. You know, some that are really high profile are the Shell cracker in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, which has been out of compliance since it started operating. Our friends at Rise St. James, Sharon Levine and her daughter and others have been fighting a Formosa. 2 crackers proposed in St. James Parish, Louisiana. It's a pretty long list. These are multi-billion-dollar facilities that, if they are built, will lock us into plastic production, you know, for another century. Even if we're effective at reducing demand, I work a lot on reducing demand. So for instance, we passed a plastic bag ban in New York State. Well, what does that mean? Well, we have 21 billion less plastic bags used in New York since the law took full effect. That's a good way to reduce demand. But what we're seeing with ethane crackers is these plastic pellets are being manufactured, and they will be exported if we reduce demand domestically. So that's why this is also an international issue. Some of you know there's a proposed plastic treaty proposed at the United Nations. A whole bunch of smart people are meeting in Paris right now. And guess what? The chemical companies, the fossil fuel companies, the plastics industry are all over Paris. They're everywhere. They show up at a city council meeting, and then they dominate UN negotiations. So you need inside game, outside game. The incredible thing is we've got the public with us. The national group Oceana does polling every so often. It shows over 80% of American voters want policies at the state and federal level to reduce plastics. And the great thing is it's bipartisan. Republican, Democrat, Green Party, Green Tea Party, everyone wants less plastics because we did not vote for all of this. So we've got public support. This comes down to mobilizing and getting people into the arena.
Yeah, I was just with the Oceana campaigns person for Massachusetts earlier today at another plastics forum, and they just released their most recent polling, and it's like, you don't see polls like that. You know, it's like everyone, I thought it was closer to 90%. I mean, it's amazing. So yes, we don't have to worry that we don't have public support. Okay, Judith, Gabby wants to know how many companies produce plastics in the US? Who are the big players?
Oh, there's a lot. So the big players are Dow, DuPont, ExxonMobil, Shell, familiar names. But what a lot of people don't know is it's also a lot of smaller companies. So I live in upstate New York, where there's a little company called Taconic Plastics right on the Vermont-New York border. And they've contaminated the local aquifer with PFAS chemicals. This is a story that is repeated over and over all over the country. We know who the big players are, but we don't pay enough attention to the little players. And there's a link with PFAS. So you really should take my class. I have a slide in my head. SABIC is one, BASF. SABIC is out of Saudi Arabia. BASF, Dow, ExxonMobil, Shell. I have the top 10, but I can't remember because that was 3 classes ago. Those are the big ones. But here's my new thing is pay attention to the smaller companies. And thank you for mentioning in the chat East Palestine, the toxic train derailment, the 10 train cars that derailed and that were later purposely put on fire as theoretically to avoid explosion, but I think really to make sure that the train corridor opened a lot more quickly again. Those 10 train cars contained vinyl chloride, a known carcinogen. 99% of vinyl chloride is used to make polyvinyl chloride PVC plastic. And there are alternatives to all of that. Plastic piping, you can use copper or steel pipes, preferably recycled copper. A lot of PVC plastic is used for baby toys. You know, the iconic yellow rubber ducky, that's PVC plastic. You know, there are alternatives to plastic, and it is true. Sometimes the alternatives are a little bit more expensive, but who pays really? We're paying with our health. We're paying with more greenhouse gas emissions. We're paying with aquifers and drinking water sources being contaminated with PFAS.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of questions in the chat. We're not going to get to all of them. This is the last one for you for now, and then we're going to move on to the state folks. But I get a lot of questions like this. So I'm going to pose this one from Kirsten, which is, so does the orange hefty bag program do any good, or is it not worth even trying to participate?
Don't participate.
And that's because really it's almost like obscuring the problem or greenwashing that they say that they can recycle, right?
It doesn't get recycled, and Hefty had a program in Boise, Idaho, where you're supposed to put everything in the Hefty bags, and a lot of that went to a cement kiln. Quite honestly, if you really want to reduce your use of plastic, you really can only reduce your use of plastic if you want to have the most environmentally sustainable impact. But you know, there's only so much we can do as individuals. We need systemic change. We need to change the laws. The World Economic Forum, not Greenpeace, who I love, the World Economic Forum predicts that within the next 20 years, plastic generation will double. We can change that trajectory with a local plastic bag ban, with a strong packaging reduction law. Systemic change is needed because we're all trying to reduce our use of plastics, and it's just not enough. There's too much.
My grandmother used to say, enough is too much. That is a perfect segue to the next part of the program. We want to hear from 3 states about what is happening on the ground and how we are reducing the use of plastics. So I'm going to introduce the next 3 speakers, and then we'll do a Q&A after that. So we'll start with Celeste. Celeste Mayfrin-Swango is the director of Environment Oregon, where she develops and runs campaigns to win real results for Oregon's environment. She's worked on issues ranging from preventing plastic pollution, stopping global warming, defending clean water, and protecting our beautiful places there. Celeste's organizing has helped to reduce kids' exposure to lead in drinking water at childcare facilities in Oregon, encourage transportation electrification, banning single-use plastic grocery bags, and more. She is also the author of the children's book, Myrtle the Turtle, Empowering Kids to Prevent Plastic Pollution. Celeste lives in Portland, Oregon, where she's coming from today. I can't get my prepositions proper. Anyway, Celeste, take it away.
Thank you so much, Janet. So as Janet said, I'm Celeste Mayford-Swango, State Director with Environment Oregon. We're a statewide member-based environmental advocacy organization that works for clean air, clean water, open space, and a livable climate. And I'm really honored to be here among such esteemed zero waste advocates. So thank you so much, Janet, for inviting me here to share some good news about progress that we're making to reduce plastic pollution here in the beautiful state of Oregon. So Environment Oregon, we are part of a zero waste coalition that's been working for years to ban one of the most wasteful and harmful single-use plastics, which is polystyrene foam. I'm sure many of you know this is a type of plastic that is typically not reused. It's not accepted in curbside recycling, and it's one of the top items found polluting Oregon's beaches. Polystyrene products are also a threat to human health. Styrene, which is a major building block of polystyrene, was recently upgraded to probably carcinogenic by the World Health Organization. So the bottom line is that polystyrene foam is wasteful and it's harmful, and we simply don't need it. So this year, we finally got it done. So because of organizing work of our coalition, which includes Surfrider, Oceana, Ocean Conservancy, MASSPIRG, Oregon Environmental Council, Association of Oregon Recyclers, Beyond Toxics, and many others, and because of the leadership of the amazing Senator Janine Salmon, our bill to ban polystyrene foam food containers, packing peanuts, and single-use coolers passed both chambers here in Oregon with bipartisan support and was signed into law by Governor Kotek about 3 weeks ago. And in addition to banning these products starting on January 1st, 2025, the bill also requires a ban of PFAS, a class of toxic forever chemicals, in food packaging as well. So in the interim, Senator Salmon has committed to forming a work group to help restaurants and other retailers navigate what the best alternatives are to polystyrene foam. And we'll also be developing policies to encourage restaurants and other retailers to not simply move away from single-use plastics to some other form of single-use containers, but to move from single-use to reusable and refillable systems. And we started to lay the groundwork for that effort this year with the passage of another bill, Senate Bill 545, which will update Oregon's health code to make it easier for Oregon restaurants to offer reusable and refillable options. Because right now in Oregon, the health code is pretty restrictive. So this bill, which was spearheaded primarily by Charlie Plyven at the Surfrider Foundation, instructs the Oregon Health Authority to do rulemaking between now and next summer to update Oregon's health code for restaurants to make sure that restaurants can offer reusable options in a sanitary way, whether it's offering reusables in-house, having customers bring their own containers, or using a third-party service like Bold Reuse here in Portland. And so that bill also passed both chambers with bipartisan support and was signed by the governor. So really excited to see progress happening in Oregon. And frankly, we're seeing a real appetite both from the public and from legislators for just reimagining how we can shift away from our throwaway culture and just find more sustainable options for our state moving forward. So thanks again so much for having me.
So great, Celeste. And you know, the reason we set up the state stories is because we knew Judith would be full of the profound and disturbing facts and figures about how vast this problem is. And at the same time, we also, you know, cannot wallow in despair. We have to celebrate the victories like the ones in Oregon. So thank you so much for that. And the next state we'll hear from is Georgia. So I'm going to introduce Janet Domenitz. Janet coordinates policy development, research, outreach, and legislative advocacy for Environment Georgia. She has run successful campaigns to designate Georgia's first first outstanding national resource water along the headwaters of the Conasauga River, expand parks along the Chattahoochee River and Jekyll Island State Park, and stop construction of 3 new coal-fired power plants in Georgia, while also advocating for solar policies that have helped make Georgia one of the top 10 states in our country for solar. She serves on the leadership team for Georgia Water Coalition and on the boards of Citizens for Progressive Transit and the Georgia Solar Energy Association. Jeanette lives in Atlanta, where she's coming to us today from, and I hope that I pronounced all those Southern names correctly. You can tell I'm a Northerner, but hopefully I did justice to all those beautiful places in Georgia. So take it away,
Great
Jeanette.
job. Thank you, Janet. Thank you for including us. Thanks for having me. It's a really impressive group and including some folks from Georgia, so that's exciting. Yeah, I'm Jeanette, the Director of Environment Georgia. We are a sister organization to Environment Oregon. So Celeste, thank you for taking care of all the who are we information. I am based in Atlanta, as Janet said, and the story that I want to talk about today is a story coming from Macon, Georgia, which, if you are not familiar with the state, is basically dead center, about an hour south of Atlanta. We successfully worked to defeat what was touted as the largest chemical recycling facility in the world here in Georgia. So in the middle of 2021, a company, Brightmark, announced that they were partnering with the Macon-Bibb Industrial Authority to build a facility which had an estimated price tag of, the articles that we were reading was saying over $680 million. And 500 million of those dollars would have come from taxpayers from an industrial development bond that was floated by the Industrial Authority. We worked with really amazing activists on the ground. We worked with a great coalition of organizations around the state, including the Georgia Water Coalition, which featured this proposal in something that they put out every year called the Dirty Dozen report. And Science for Georgia, which organized a sign-on letter for scientists calling some of the science in the proposed permit for the facility into question. And I thought I would take just a couple minutes to talk about what were the major talking points for us, even though Judith did a great job, I think, of touching on chemical recycling or advanced recycling. And then I think this coalition has even done a really great, entire webinar on chemical and advanced recycling. So hopefully that recording exists, and if folks want to access it, they can. But we really focused on, I think, 4 main points. So the first was just talking about all the toxins. And again, Judith talked about some of this, but we pointed out that all of the plastics that Brightmark would be taking in contained really dangerous and toxic chemicals that are linked to cancer and all sorts of other terrible health effects. So that was a major talking point for us. Second was we just hammered on the really terrible track record that plastic to fuel has. So across the world, facilities like this Macon facility have released toxins into the air and into waterways. They've exploded, they've caught fire, and they've consistently violated wastewater and other regulations. Third, and again, I guess maybe a little bit of context is, it depends on who you're talking to, which talking point you use. So in Georgia, in some places, we don't really talk about climate change, but in some places you can talk about climate change. And the reality is that these plastic to fuel facilities are climate nightmares. So they are incredibly energy intensive. And you're basically creating more diesel fuel, which will just be creating more pollution. So really emphasizing that this was terrible greenwashing and a climate bomb to the right audience. And then finally, and again, in some places, depending on who the messenger was and who we were talking to, plastics to fuel facilities are incredibly economically unsound. So the technology is really not commercially viable at scale. Again, Georgia was proposing putting $500 million into this proposal. Most other facilities around the state or around the country also receive incredible amounts of public financing. And in a lot of those places, it's not proven that these facilities can actually help pay those taxpayers back. So those were the points that we consistently hit. And after about a year of working with local activists, working with groups around the state, working with the media, talking to decision makers, helping to drive turnout at key events, we were really excited to see first the mayor say that he no longer supported the proposed plants, and then the industrial authority actually said they were ending their arrangements with Brightmark. And all of that again took about a year. So very exciting to make some progress. We have lots more to do though.
I mean, winning is big when you stop something bad. So we're grateful for everybody in Georgia for that amazing victory. I'm going to quickly wrap up the state stories with some bad news, good news from Massachusetts. The bad news is we've had dozens of bills filed in the Massachusetts legislature for well over a decade, and none of them have gotten to a governor's desk, whatever, 3 different governors, maybe 4 if I look at the chart. The good news is, in the meantime, because of the kind of activism and citizen involvement and public support that we know exists for reducing plastic pollution, as of last month, which was yesterday, as of May, 157 cities and towns in Massachusetts have passed bans or regulations reducing plastics. And I'll do a little bit, throw some numbers around. It's 157 cities and towns out of 351, but it represents almost 2/3 of the population of our state, because it includes Boston and Worcester and Springfield and some of the big cities. And it is, I know I'm talking to, I'm preaching to the choir here when I say it is not easy to get your city or town to take an action like this. This did not happen because it came up, on the evening that the city council met and someone had an idea and this takes effort, mobilizing, organizing, and the fact that these 157 towns have gone ahead and push their local decision makers to do this, I think it bodes really well for this legislative session. And as I said earlier, I just came from an event in the State House this morning talking about plastics pollution. And I think that it's a great story of what citizens can do to take the plastic pollution matter into their own hands, as as Judith described, as the problem just balloons all around us. Shouldn't have said balloons, have to find another metaphor. We don't want balloons. But so anyway, I think the story from here is we're gonna make progress at a statewide level this session, I know, but in the meantime, the local citizen action is a great tale and shows that we can make progress. From the tiny towns in Western Mass to the big city of Boston, people have taken action. So that's the good news. So we have a few minutes, either for any of the 3 of us from the states or more general questions. Again, I will, let's see, let me go back to the chat. Oh, thanks for that list from Diane. All right, I'm going to go back. Let's see, Judith, I'm going to throw this one to you. And we'll take the next 5 minutes. So anything that's on your mind, put it in the chat. We'll try to get to it. Judith, Rosella asks, there is an increasing amount of coated paper and cardboard being used to create waterproof sealable packaging. While it uses plastic film, do you consider this a sustainable direction to move to?
Well, not if there's PFAS in the chemicals. PFAS is still being used because it's grease resistant. It makes things slippery. So, there are not many states that ban PFAS in packaging. So that is a concern. And you also don't want to make the paper or the cardboard non-recyclable. But we're at this inflection point where there are a lot of companies who know that consumers don't love plastics. Unless you work for the plastics industry, I haven't met anyone who says they really like plastics. It's like we don't really aspire to that. So a lot of new products are coming out. Some are okay, some are not. There's no real rating system for it. They're all different. We don't have disclosure, but I'm just, when I served at EPA during the Obama administration, I worked a lot on PFAS contamination of groundwater, including drinking water. So my radar goes up right away when I hear about coatings and anything kind of slippery, because we have to make sure there are no PFAS chemicals.
Great. Okay, Georgia. Jeanette, I'm calling you Georgia, which is a lovely first name too. You mentioned, I'm intrigued and think it's great that you were able to focus your messaging on what worked in Georgia. And you were saying that in some instances, you don't talk about climate change. What do you think are the most compelling arguments for people in, I say this in a nonpartisan way, in red states, where people might receive the information in a different way?
I mean, the climate stuff is changing rapidly. So that's my caveat. I think it works better than it ever has. But I think the toxic stuff is a no-brainer because it is really nasty stuff. And there are track records of really nasty emissions at these plants and lots of places that you can point to.
And I just want to add one thing. So we have an opportunity when fighting chemical recycling or advanced recycling facilities to have vibrant, fun coalitions with fiscal conservatives. I spent 10 years as a community organizer with MASSPIRG, blocking garbage incinerators up and down the Hudson Valley and then promoting reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting as the alternative. And some of our best partnerships were with groups that just don't like the idea of the government wasting tax dollars on things that pollute or don't work. And so I think whenever there's a chemical recycling facility proposed, of course, I would reach out to people who care about a clean environment and medical experts, but find your fiscal conservatives, because without taxpayer subsidies, these facilities fail.
I'll agree with that. $500 million bond was pretty unprecedented in Georgia. And for a lot of folks, that was all you had to say.
And how does that work in Oregon, Celeste? Like, is there an interesting bedfellow coalition, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think in Oregon, kind of across the political spectrum, people have conservation value. But we were seeing, similar to how Jeanette's describing, that legislators in particular were more compelled by the public health argument in a lot of cases than the environmental argument. So I think, there's this nexus of the toxics and impact to human health in this work. And I think that both helps us build coalitions with groups that work primarily on preventing toxic chemical exposure. But then also I think it's such an important part of the story of why plastics are harmful that is, important and compelling part of the story to be telling as well.
Yeah. And, I don't want to be a downer, but the flip side of it, we're supposed to be so blue and progressive and ahead of the game here. And we're behind all of you. So I think, looking for, all of these points about looking for partners that aren't just in the echo chamber, but really try and like shake up the politics as usual. That's, I'm going to make sure, I'm going to go check our coalition list right after this webinar to make sure we're doing it right. So I wanted to have a couple of minutes for like takeaways and wrap up. And, when we titled this session, Two Truths and a Lie, of course, there's many more truths and lies that are involved in the debate around plastics, but I think I'll take the liberty of saying the main ones that I think we were trying to get across is, plastics are polluting. We need to reduce as job number one. Those are two truths. And the lie is basically, there is no magic solution of chemical or advanced recycling. I mean, it's nice to use the word recycling for the industry, I'm sure, but it's not going to solve our crisis. So I don't want to monopolize the truths and the lie, but I wanted to try and convey those as takeaways. Judith, I know that you started with a call for New York mobilization, because it sounds like that bill is happening any minute. If you joined us late, hopefully that bill number is, it's still in the chat. If you're in New York or know people who live in New York, I don't think it works to call legislators from out of state. That's my opinion. But if you have friends or relatives in New York and you could get them to make the call now, sounds like that's very timely. So that's a takeaway. I'm here to tell you that class with Judith that she mentioned, did you put it in the chat, Judith?
No, I didn't, but it's on our website.
Okay, it's on the Beyond Plastics website. It was a blast. I have a folder full of notes from it, and I've been working on this for years, so I can tell you absolutely worthwhile and really reasonable. What was it, like $100 or something?
Yeah, it's $100 unless you want academic credit, and we waive the fee for environmental justice advocates.
Yeah,
It's
so
a bargain. 7 classes on Zoom, Wednesday nights from 7 to 9 Eastern.
Yeah, if only my college courses had cost $100, I'd have my bank account would look different. But yes, so that's a takeaway. Excellent class, great opportunity. It starts again in September. If you live in Massachusetts, I'm putting my email in the chat. We are starting soon with hearings on, at this event this morning. It was confirmed that June 14th is an Environment and Natural Resources hearing where some of the plastic bills will come up. They haven't published the list yet, but we need all the help that we can get here. We're behind. 9, I believe, other states have already taken measures that we haven't. So please contact me at this email address and we can talk. Okay, what other takeaways or comments do our speakers have before we wrap up? All right, well, I just want to really thank Jeanette from Georgia, Celeste from Oregon, and Judith Enck, who has been a leader in this work in all different ways for decades. I think for all of us who care about this issue, it's always a combination of, dealing with the gravity of plastic pollution and knowing our facts and figures and not melting away in despair, but taking the energy that we feel from this and mobilizing. And you heard from Celeste and Jeanette how progress can be made. Our cities and towns tell that story, and hopefully New York will be the next one. So thank you so much, everybody. Gabby from Waterkeepers Alliance, thank you so much for all of your operational help. And I don't know if it's sunny where you are, but it's basically summer here in Massachusetts. So go enjoy, get outside, and let's reduce plastic pollution. Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much.